Let's take a few moments to check in, taking what we call the backward step, the U-turn, the sacred pause, reflecting on how we are in this moment, noticing where the mind is at. Noticing if the mind is ruminating on something that happened today or something that will happen or something that should have happened. And dropping to the level of the heart, notice what emotions are coursing through your inner experience, what feelings, and see if you can feel them, allowing yourself to feel them. And then dropping into the body, noticing your body, tuning into any of the senses, hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, or touching. Noticing the passing stream. And as we notice our thoughts, emotions, and sensations, notice an inability to control them. Thoughts arise and pass, emotions arise and pass, sensations arise and pass. They come into being and return to non-being. So through this coming and going, see if you could find a space of peace, a space of equanimity, an equanimous approach to the ups and downs, to the changing waves of this life. And as we close out this short little exercise, let us finish with 3 deep breaths. Taking a deep inhale through the nostrils and a nice, easy exhale through the mouth. 2 more times, inhaling nostrils And exhale, mouth. And sometimes we say we don't listen to the Dharma. We receive it. We are open to it. Much less of a lecture that requires focus and concentration on what the lecturer is saying. More like sitting on the beach, watching the waves flow in and out, appreciating what is, and letting whatever truth arises to wash over you. You might keep your eyes closed or begin to open them. You can sit, you can stand, you can lie down. You can choose whatever posture is comfortable for you. Hello. Greetings. Namaste. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to those of you joining me in the room. Thanks to those of you joining me on Zoom. And thanks to those of you listening to the recording afterwards. This is a little Dharma talk that I like to call Living from the Heart, all about this 18-inch spiritual journey, which can sometimes take many lifetimes, simply to go from the head to the heart. I'd like to begin with a poem of my own as a lead-in to this week's topic, close with a short meditation, and then have some time at the end for some question and answer. And today's poem is called Prajnanam Brahma, and it goes, let the gift of today bathe you in the same sunlight that lifts the morning mist from the rolling hills. Turn skyward and earthward like oak, expanding what is possible and cultivating your spaciousness. If the child at the sandcastle turns inward, she'll find peace. If you release the weight of the world, you will find the same. Don't get caught up in the future of humanity when you could be resting in the presence of eternity. Waves of all the same ocean, we are here, floating here, in timeless, changeless, formless. So I thought I'd begin today with a little story that you find common in Zen circles. And in this story, you're having a beautiful day. You're lying in your canoe. It's nighttime. You're lying down. Your canoe's in the middle of the water. You're looking up at the beautiful stars in the sky, totally at peace. And after a few moments in this nice reverie, it gets interrupted by another canoe slamming into yours, and it knocks you out of your peacefulness. And as we human beings are, you notice some anger arising, some frustration arising, and some thoughts arising. And I can't believe this person rammed into my canoe, completely ruined my beautiful evening. Who can't even row and steer a canoe? What kind of an idiot was driving this boat? So you sit up You look over and you find the boat is empty. There's no one in the boat at all. It had simply broke free of the dock and the wind carried it and hit yours. And suddenly it dawns on you how silly your thoughts were. And this is just one of the things that we seek to cultivate in our practice. We begin to drop out of the passing stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations to see them for what they are: passing, ephemeral, temporary, and largely a generation of our own way of being. We're here to watch the stories that the mind creates, all the justifications and beliefs and opinions, and all the ways that we blame external people, blame external circumstances in the world for interrupting the sense of peace and happiness and joy that we seek to feel. So there's a lot we can learn from this story. We are here to cultivate what we sometimes refer to as responsibility. So as we notice our reactions to things, we notice they are reactions. Just like when you go to the doctor and they test your reflexes and they hit a little nerve in your knee and it causes your leg to move a certain way. So too, in order to awaken, in order to become awake and aware, we have to drop out of this trance, out of this unconsciousness, out of this stimulation and immediate reaction. And we do that by cultivating a bit of space to be able to to be able to respond to situations in our life from our intention rather than react out of judgment, hatred, and ill will. So you probably know the Viktor Frankl quote: in between the stimulus and the response, there is a space, and within that space, there lies our freedom. And we are here to cultivate that space. So sometimes in meditation, we say that we are here to notice the itch without scratching it. So we notice our tendencies to immediately react to sensory stimulation in our life. But rather than react, we take the sacred pause so that we can respond. And we are here to become familiar with our mind's habitual reactions to things and look at all the stories that the mind creates. And this is what the mind does. This is a perfectly natural experience of having a mind. It's like when you are flying in an airplane and the airplane is about to land, but then it bumps on the ground and suddenly your mind is like, this is it, gonna die. Right? It's going to generate all sorts of stories about what potentially will happen. So sometimes we even say that fear, F-E-A-R, is false entities appearing real. And we're here to look at the false entities that our mind creates. You probably know the Mark Twain quote that the worst things in my life never actually happened. Because our mind is kind of a doomsday machine sometimes. We think our life is going to end, the world is going to end. It comes up with all sorts of scenarios. You're just having a wonderful day at work, and then you see that your boss wants you to meet you in their office. Suddenly, oh my gosh, what is going to happen, right? The worst things in our life tend to not happen. So there's another story, and this involves an old bull, B-U-L-L, like an old cow, who's, when you're an animal trying to survive in the jungle, it's survival of the fittest out there. So as you get older, you become less and less capable to hunt and capture your prey. So this old bull wasn't doing too well. And I need to change the story because it's a lion. It's a lion that is old, and the lion finds a bull in the middle of a clearing in the forest. And the lion's like, oh my gosh, this is so fantastic. So the lion eats the bull And the lion hasn't eaten in a long time. So after it eats the bull, it just takes a big, loud roar into the jungle. And when that war happens, a hunter who's not too far away hears the lion, goes over to the lion, shoots it, and kills it. So the moral of the story is when you are full of bull, keep your mouth shut. So I had to switch it. I was like, no, no, no. The lion is the one eating the bull. So as we take the backward step, as we observe the mind, we notice all our habitual reactions to things, all the obstacles that prevent us from being at peace in this moment. So another mental complex or mental patterning that you might know of is the if only mind. And the if only mind is the complex that says, if only such and such were to happen, or if only such and such were to be the case, then I could be happy. Then I could be at peace. If only my partner really understood me. If only my boss wasn't such a jerk. If only I got paid more money. We have all sorts of resistances to this moment, all sorts of desires and longings and wishes for things to be different. And it prevents us from finding peace in the here and the now. So, usually, when one embarks upon any kind of practice that requires certain action, so we have our yoga practice and we have our meditation practice, of course, this takes time. It's not instant ramen over here. This is a long practice that's going to take many hours of disciplined attention. So usually what comes up is, well, I would love to be able to sit down for 30 minutes and meditate, but I experience so many interruptions, right? The kids knock on the door, the partner knocks on the door. I experience all sorts of things that get in the way of me truly finding peace. And we look at this, we look at, this, how can this distraction actually be part of the practice? How can I look at what appears to me as an obstacle from finding peace that is actually grist for the mill? This is actually a crucial and key part of the path. So our first step is to just cultivate this awareness, cultivate all the stories, all the ideas, all the disaster scenarios that the mind creates. So there's a story of a man who's seeing his therapist and he's having some trouble with his own anxiety and anger. So the therapist is like, oh, you should try some mindfulness meditation. You can go to a little retreat and you'll feel better. So the man goes to the retreat and he sits in zazen, begins to observe his thoughts. And what does he observe? Anger, anxiety, same thing he was experiencing outside of the meditation retreat. So he goes back to his therapist and says, that did not work at all. All I felt was more anxiety and more anger. I didn't feel better at all. And the therapist said, I said you would feel better. And now you're feeling your anger better. And now you're feeling your anxiety better. So we are actually here to feel better, not better in a more positive sense, but here to feel all of the things, here to cultivate awareness of all of the things in our inner experience. So we have the four foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of thought, emotion, and sensation. And the fourth foundation of mindfulness is the equanimity. So that's what we did at the very beginning. But there's also some really important symbolism in this little story of you in your boat getting rocked by an empty boat. Is this basic idea that you find in Buddhist cosmology of emptiness. And it's often confused of what emptiness means. People think like an empty void of nothingness. But emptiness is not nothingness. Anytime we kind of talk about things like mindfulness or emptiness, it's important to recognize it's always mindfulness of something. So we can't just practice mindfulness, but we can practice mindful breathing, mindful eating, mindful walking. And it's always going to be mindful of something. We can practice mindful speech when we're talking to another human being. Similarly, when we talk about this idea of emptiness, it's always going to be empty of something. So if you have, say, a glass of water and you were to empty it, now the glass is empty of water. So, in this context where we have an empty boat, the emptiness that we think about is empty of self, empty of a separate, isolated sense of self. And this is a really important understanding to come to when we do notice the mind become full of bulb, and we do notice the mind generate all sorts of stories about criticism and blame. We can recognize essentially that there's nobody home. And what I mean by that is all behavior is conditioned. Or, to put it a different way, if we think about interdependence and dependent co origination, is that nothing arises in an isolated condition. We all arise due to thousands upon thousands of causes and conditions. So we exist right now because there is air around us that's generated by all the plants and algae in the world. The earth is at just the right distance from the sun to be at just the right temperature for life to exist. So just our own existence is dependent upon thousands of factors. So we say there is no separate self. And this is a really wonderful way to begin to let go of blame. When we say, I blame you for doing this thing, for interrupting my beautiful meditation practice, we can recognize that a person's behavior has arisen due to a set of causes and conditions. So in restorative justice, for example, we say that hurt people, meaning that those who have experienced hurt in the past end up hurting people in the present and the future. So Oprah, for example, and Bruce DePerry have a wonderful book, What Happened to You? Where we shift from thinking, what is wrong with you? I can't believe you committed this crime or did this act that we describe as heinous, and rather see what happened to you, what happened in your past, what conditioned responses have been put in your mind to cause this behavior. And if you talk to a child psychologist, for example, they will tell you the same. They will say, all behavior makes sense in context. If you want to look at why your child is acting out in this particular circumstance, you have to look at what is happening in their environment. So, as we tune into this idea of emptiness and emptiness of something, even if there, say, was a person in that boat, we don't have to blame them. We don't have to judge them. We don't have to push them out of our heart. And the other important symbolism that we can find here in this idea of emptiness is that an empty boat, especially at night, is filled with light, filled with the moonlight. In other words, the more that we are able to empty ourselves of clutter and junk and bull, the more lightness and freedom and joy we can find. So, along with emptiness, we also have this basic idea that everything is a reflection of everything else. So, there's a story where Fatsang, the most important patriarch of Huayan, used an ingenious demonstration to explain the theory of interdependence to the Empress Wu, who was a great patron of Buddhism. One day, the Empress said to Fatsang, I am struggling with this idea of Buddha nature and emptiness and totality. Sometimes I feel as if I almost grasp it, but then other times I'm not sure again. Can you give me a clear illustration? And Fatsang promised he would. A few days later, he returned and said, Your demonstration is ready. Follow me. And he led her to a small room where he had attached mirrors to the floor, ceiling, and all four walls. And while she was watching, he placed a statue of the Buddha at the center. Suddenly, the Empress could see Buddhas appear infinitely reflected in every direction. How marvelous, she exclaimed as the concepts became real for her. She could literally see how all was reflected in everything else, all exhibiting Buddha everywhere. She could see how all things were codependent, all coming into being simultaneously at the moment that Fatsang placed the statue down on the floor in the room full of mirrors. So, believe it or not, our task is to become nobody. And within which, just as like a pure dewdrop or a pure diamond reflects the universe around us, we too will see ourselves as a reflection of the universe. The problem is not that there is an empty boat that crashed into our boat. The problem is that there is somebody in our boat, meaning us, who thinks they're quite justified in all their stories and opinions. So the general idea is that we are here to become nobody, as the Buddha would say, to let go of all that we cling to as I, me, and mine. And this is not easy to do because your entire life you've been set up to be a somebody. As soon as you came into this world, you were given a name and a social security number. And largely, especially in our individualistic culture, you've been set up to be an isolated individual focused on developing your somebodyness in the world. So there's all sorts of symbolism in this story. We have the boats, we have emptiness, and we also have the waves. So the Zen master, Ihai Dogen, in 12th century, wrote this haiku. Midnight, no waves, no wind, empty boat, flooded with moonlight. So the moon is always such a wonderful representation of the light of enlightenment. And you'll find all sorts of haikus and references to the moonlight. One haiku that I love goes, "The thief left it behind, the moon at the window." Meaning that lots of things can be taken from us in this world, except, of course, for our own awakened nature. Buddha just means awakened one, and we all have the capacity to awaken inside of us. So you might not even say our goal is to attain Buddhahood, but to realize the Buddhahood that is already here. Just like the Buddha in the hall of mirrors being reflected infinitely in all directions, you too have an awakened nature inside of you that is simultaneously reflected in all things. So our goal is to, if you can call it a goal, is to empty ourselves. So the master Longchenpa says, the primordial, luminous nature of the mind is self-arisen primordial wisdom, empty and clear. By nature, it is empty like space, yet its character is luminous like the sun and moon. And the radiance of its cognitive potency manifests unceasingly and unobstructedly like the surface of a clear mirror free from stain. So you might imagine what it might look like to stop directing the boat. It, of course, involves letting things be as they are and letting things affect us as they might do without any resistance. So to become no body means to have no resistance to the waves, to the current of the water, or the current of life, or the current of Dharma, and we just go wherever the Dharma wants us to go. So other stories abound about really what it means to just be in this flow of life. In one story, a group of monks is walking walking through the forest, and they get to the banks of a river. And on the other side of the river, they see an old man. And the old man kind of falls down a little bit and then trips and then goes into the rushing river and gets carried away by the water. So the monks are like, well, this is probably the end of this old man's life. Let us sit and pray and honor him. So they sit at the banks of the river, and then suddenly, 100 yards down the path, down the river, the old man pops out of the water and goes bounding along the path. And the monks are quite surprised at what just occurred. So they chase after them and they finally catch up to him. And they ask, how did you do that? How did you survive the water and not get hit by any rocks? And he looks at them somewhat confused and says, what do you mean? I just went in with a swirl and out with a whirl. So this is a story on not resisting. There is a flow that life has. You might call it the Tao or the Zen or the Way. All of these, of course, are just fingers pointing at the moon, meaning that there are millions of circumstances and variables that we could not possibly comprehend. So we're here to find harmony and align ourselves with it. So Ryokan, the 18th century Zen poet, says, to find the Buddhist law or Dharma, drift east, drift west, come and go, entrusting yourself to the waves. So there's another story that involves Jita Krishnamurti, where in one of Jita Krishnamurti's talks, he goes, you want to know my secret? And of course, this perked everyone's ears up, because very rarely does your guru give you their secret. And he just says, I'm okay with what happens. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to cultivate being okay with what happens. I was thinking about this past week because there's a lot of interesting developments going on with the politics of the United States of America. And I was thinking, what would it take to be okay with what happens? Let's say November rolls around. What would it be to be totally okay with whatever happens? And it's not easy, of course. It is quite a challenge. But again, stories abound, symbolism abounds. In fact, here's a little poem about a little duck. This is by Donald C. Babcock. Now we are ready to look at something pretty special. It is a duck riding the ocean 100 feet beyond the surf. No, it isn't a gull. A gull always has a raucous touch about him. This is some sort of duck, and he cuddles in the swells. He isn't cold, and he is thinking things over. There is a big heaving in the Atlantic, and he is part of it. He looks a bit like a mandarin or the Lord Buddha meditating under the Bodhi tree. But he has hardly enough above the eyes to be a philosopher. He has poise, however, which is what philosophers must have. He can rest while the Atlantic heaves because he rests in the Atlantic. Probably he doesn't know how large the ocean is, and neither do you, but he realizes it. And what does he do, I ask you? He sits down in it. He reposes in the immediate as if it were infinity, which it is. That is religion, and the duck has it. He has made himself a part of the boundless by easing himself into it just where it touches him. Hmm. So there's so many ways to think about this. What it means to clear the mind, what it means to release resistance. And again, stories abound about the state of mind of somebody who is okay with what happens. And the reason there's so many stories is that there's so many things that could happen to us in this life. You probably heard the story of Hakuin, who is the monk that lived in the outskirts of the village. And he largely kept to himself. And then there's another daughter that lives in the village who becomes pregnant. And the daughter did not want to tell her parents about the boyfriend that she was hiding. So she said, "You know who created this pregnancy? It was Hakuin, the monk." So the parents aren't happy about this. So when the baby is born, they take the baby and they bring it to Hakuin and they say, "This is your baby." And Hakuin goes, "Oh, is that so?" Takes the baby. Few years pass by, and the young daughter, suddenly overcome with guilt, finally confesses, "It wasn't Hakuin, it was my boyfriend." And the parents go to Hakuin and they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. We can have the baby back." And Hakuin goes, "Oh, is that so?" Hands the baby back. Story after story. I'll just offer one more because it's a good one. You probably heard the story of the farmer who has one horse and the horse runs away. And there's some very nosy villagers in this story. And they go to the farmer and they say, "Oh, what terrible luck you have. You lost your only horse." He says, "You never know." The next day, the horse comes back with 3 wild horses. And the nosy villagers say, "Oh, what wonderful luck you have. Now you have 4 total horses." He says, "You never know." The next day, his son, trying to tame one of the wild horses, gets flung off the horse and breaks his arm. And the villagers, as they are quite observant, they say, "Oh, what terrible luck you have. Now you don't have your oldest son to help plow the fields." And he says, "You never know." And the next day, the military comes to town looking for young men of age to go fight the war. And of course, they skip over the farmer's son because he has broken his arm. And the villagers go, "Oh, so lucky." And he says, "You never know." And you can imagine the story can go on and on and on. The point is, we don't know. So some call it beginner's mind. I tend to prefer the don't know mind. We don't know. There's so much more in this life that we can't know than what we can. So in this way, we slowly become non-attached. We slowly grasp onto our beliefs, opinions, ideals, ideas a little bit less. And this helps us to clear the mind. I have another haiku for you. 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, a cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. Just seeing what I have time left to say. I'll talk a little bit about clearing the mind. Because in my experience and my studies, I've found there's 3 main ways to clear the mind. First way is to stop things from coming in. And I tend to start with this way because this is where most people in the West go, "Uh-oh, oh no." Because we are pummeled all the time in our modern technological world with all sorts of extrasensory information. And as yogis, as we take this backward step, we become in tune with our body, with our mind, and we notice how things that come into our awareness affect our internal state. So, this is actually one of the fundamental principles behind a yogic diet and why one might follow a yogic diet. We're not here to lose weight. We're not here to eat superfoods. 2 of the main reasons we follow a yogic diet is one, we need tapas. We need discipline and we need strength to continue the practice. If you've ever taken a yoga class, consume a lot of energy in class. In order to have a strong mind, we need a strong body. In order to have a strong body, we need to consume foods that nourish us. So fasting can be a key piece of yogic practice, but in general, we do want to nourish the body in order to have the strength, gumption, and discipline to stick to our practice. And other aspects of the yogic diet point out that things that we consume will affect how we are. So Swami Shivananda says, the yogi is concerned with the subtle effects that food has on his mind and subtle body. You might prefer the term astral body or energetic body. I like subtle body because it's subtle. He therefore avoids foods which are overly stimulating, preferring those which render the mind calm and the intellect sharp. So usually when I run retreats, I'm like, okay, everyone, we're going to follow a yogic diet. So that means no alcohol. And people are like, okay, that makes sense. Alcohol is a depressant, slows the mind, makes us lethargic. It's not very conducive to a yoga or meditation practice. And then they say, and that also means no meat. And that tends to get some grumbles, right? But we often say ahipasiko, which means see for yourself. Have a banana before your 90-minute Ashtanga practice and have a 16-ounce T-bone and see how it goes. And what you will probably find, you can also hear the reports from others, is that we also avoid very heavy food. We also avoid any food that takes a long time to digest, anything that's going to weigh us down. So that includes, old, stale, and putrid food. It includes meat, includes heavy oils, deep fried stuff. That's also out. So in general, people are pretty okay with this. But then I also say, or we also follow, no caffeine. And people don't like that. That tends to be the most resistance because we are cultivating a state that is neither too slow or too fast, right? Neither too stoned or too high in cocaine. We're looking for that sweet spot right in the middle. So we are avoiding foods that are too stimulating. So although India is full of spicy food in general, the yogic diet tends to be pretty bland because we are avoiding overstimulation. And then we're also avoiding the slow, heavy foods to find that sweet spot right in the middle. So we have this basic idea that we do need a certain level of discipline and control in our practice. So this is why the first step of the Ashtanga system is our yamas. And yama literally just means control, hence pranayama, control of the breath and the prana energy moving through the body. So the 5 yamas are all the things that we're not supposed to do. So we have ahimsa, don't harm. Another reason to practice vegetarianism is because we don't want to harm other sentient beings. We have asteya. So when you hear the in Sanskrit, that means the opposite. So that's non-stealing. We have aparigraha, which means non-greed. We also have satya, truthfulness. In other words, don't lie. And then we have a very controversial yama, brahmacharya, and it's controversial because by and large, this does mean celibacy. And most modern people and yogis don't like that. So you might see this translated as moderation. But they are deeply connected to the 5 precepts in Buddhism. So the 5 precepts in Buddhism also have very similar: no killing, no stealing. For most Buddhists, it's no sexual misconduct and no lying. But to me, the interesting distinction is that rather than non-greed, they have no intoxicants. In other words, yes, we will have a very hard time meditating if we just had 4 cups of coffee on the one end, and if we just had 4 shots of alcohol on the other end. Now, why am I spending so much time talking about diet? To emphasize that we take in and digest all sorts of things. Food is just one external thing that we digest and changes our internal state. So too does the media that we consume through our phones, through our television, through our computers. Even driving down the street, you will see all sorts of signs and advertisements and billboards. So Thich Nhat Hanh offers this way of thinking about the fifth precept of no intoxicants. Becoming aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I vow to ingest only items that preserve peace, well being, and joy in my body, in my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family and society. I am determined not to use alcohol or any other intoxicant or to ingest foods or other items that contain toxins, such as certain TV programs, magazine, books, films, and conversations. So sometimes we say it's hard to meditate after a day of killing and stealing. The mind is going to be quite agitated. Well, you can imagine it's hard to meditate after 5 hours of binge watching any sort of show that also features all sorts of actions of violence, death, and stealing. That's my commentary. I'm aware that to damage my body or my consciousness with these poisons is to betray my ancestors, my parents, my society, and future generations. I will work to transform violence, fear, anger, and confusion in myself and in society by practicing a diet for myself and for society. I understand that a proper diet is crucial for self transformation and for the transformation of society. So that's the first way to think about what it might mean to clear the mind, to stop things from coming in. And then what do we do with the things that are already in the mind? And that gives us the second way to clear the mind, which is to actually cultivate a level of spaciousness. Common metaphor that's used to describe this is if you were to take a tablespoon of salt and put it in a cup of water, you will end up with very salty water. If you take a tablespoon of salt and put it in a large, pure lake, the lake remains unperturbed. The lake remains just as pure, or essentially just as pure as it was before. So, too, we cultivate a spacious mind where things don't leave a trace as they pass through. So, one famous Zen master would have a student walk across the room and he would go, "Where are your footprints?" Right? So just as the birds don't leave tracks across the sky, just as you can't hammer a nail into the sky, to use another Zen metaphor, if we cultivate a level of spaciousness in the mind, then suddenly those little day-to-day challenges and stresses won't affect us as much. So there's another story, little theme here today of people going to meditation retreats, where a man is kind of like a high executive at a company. And he's given a really important presentation to the board of directors. And during that presentation, he pees his pants. He's so embarrassed, and his boss takes him aside and is like, "This can't keep happening. You need to control this." He goes, "Okay, I know. So he goes to the therapist, and the therapist is like, "You know what? Go on a little mindfulness meditation retreat. You'll be able to have a certain level of discipline and control and take care of this problem. It's probably just stress, right? That's causing this to happen." So the man goes on a mindfulness meditation retreat. He comes back and he tells his boss, "Don't worry, it's not a problem anymore." He gives another presentation, pees his pants. Boss is like, "You said it wasn't a problem." And the guy's like, "Yeah, it doesn't bother me anymore." So, so much of life we can't control, but this is why we take the backward step, because we are here to control our minds, to control our reactions to the things that happen to us in our life. So we can clear the mind by preventing certain clutter from coming in. We don't want to become hoarders and clutter up the mind. We can also create a much more spacious, open, aware, and not attached mind so that things don't stick around for too long. As the saying goes, you want to leave the front door open, but then the back door too. So as visitors come, whether it's anger, fear, hatred, even joy and happiness, we invite them in for tea, but still, we don't let them stick around for too long. And then the third one is essentially the one we've been talking about so far, but I want to finish with it because it is the most challenging of them all. And I find that people do tend to have a fairly romanticized version of what it means to clear the mind, in terms of people think, yes, I clear the mind and I just find myself at peace with all things. But the extent to which we are clearing the mind goes much further and much deeper than that, because we are actually here to free ourselves of all conceptual thinking, not just cultivate a few nice attachments and let go of everything else, but to cultivate no attachments, nothing to cling to as I, me, or mine. So not only all those thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and ideas that we hold so tightly onto, but literally we are letting go of the ground beneath our feet that we rely on for a sense of certainty, safety, and stability. So another moon story, or another moon haiku. Now that my house has burned down, there is nothing blocking my view of the moon. So this way, Zen masters are sometimes described as stealing the beggar's bowl or stealing the farmer's cow. In other words, whatever it is that you are most attached to, we're also here to let go of that. Hence the story where a farmer does lose all of his cows and he becomes very distraught. So he goes to the master and the master says, "Oh, fantastic. Now you have no more cows left to lose." So it's actually in those existential crises where we don't know who we are because of the causes and conditions, where we thought of ourselves, say, as a farmer, but now that I've lost all of my cows, what am I? Now that I've lost my sense of stability and certainty, who am I? So as the saying goes, our practice is like jumping out of an airplane, realizing we have no parachute, but then we realize there is no ground, and then we realize that no one jumped. So we actually are here to let go of it all. And this is actually what nirvana means. So there's always a number of ways to translate certain spiritual concepts in foreign languages. Nirvana technically means extinguish or blowing out. So it can be interpreted to mean, like, if you have a candle, you extinguish the candle by blowing it out. So sometimes the candle and the extinguishment that we are looking for is the end of suffering. So we're here to extinguish our suffering, the fires of suffering that keep burning us. It's also a lovely idea to think of what is nirvana? It is the ultimate letting go, the ultimate release, the ultimate ending of resistance to find peace with all that is. But this is still not deep enough, because we are extinguishing all, again, ideas, concepts. We are letting go of all our tightly held beliefs. We are finding the extinction of our conceptual thought that prevents us from being in this moment, right here and right now. Because there will always be a difference between the explained world and the experienced one. The explained world exists in words and concepts and the mind, but there's a big difference between the word water and drinking water to quench your thirst. And the word food will not cure your hunger. So when we talk about enlightenment or satori or this moment, we have to recognize it is an experience that we are tapping into. And we get there not by attaining anything, because if enlightenment is something you have to attain, then it's also something that you can lose. So as we say, gain is illusion, loss is enlightenment. We're here to lose the cows, lose the house. We're here to empty the boat, empty the cup, find emptiness in order to see our own reflection with all things. So with that, let's come to a straight spine. Take the shoulders up to the ears. Feel that tension, feel that tightness. As Chogyam Trungpa says, we're just a bundle of tense muscles defending our existence. Fortunately, in each moment, we can let go. Exhaled out. And you might close your eyes or keep them slightly open and let go. Let go of the past, which is illusion. Let go of the future, which is illusion. And let go of any conceptualization of the present. Let go of the superiority complex, that you are better than others. Let go of the inferiority complex, that you are worse than others. And let go of the equality complex. You let go of it all. So as we breathe in and breathe out, as Shunryu Suzuki says, what you call I is just a door, swinging back and forth with each inhale and exhale. There is breathing happening, but you are not breathing. Just as there is listening happening, but you are not listening. Everything is as it is. Again, dropping thoughts, dropping any fingers, pointing at the moon. Empty the boat to let it become filled with light. Closing out with one final poem called Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love you back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever, and may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that. May we all see beyond the surface waves. May we all cherish the sacred in all beings. And may we all find our way to lasting peace. Thank you for sharing your presence with me. Namaste.